Salut, hi. Oui, je suis francophone, mais je vais faire la présentation en anglais parce que on est censé faire ça. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Claire, and I'm here as a representative of my band, YACHT. The other two are right here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we fundamentally altered our creative process to make an album called Chain Tripping. And I'm calling this session How to Chain Trip because although the process is maybe a little bit idiosyncratic, it's also very adaptable, at least in its philosophical approach to machine learning. To give you a little bit of context about who we are, YACHT is a project that has been around for now 18 years. It was founded by my partner, Jana, and named after this exact sign, this sign that he saw on the street in Portland, Oregon in 2002. And it says, "Young Americans Challenging High Technology." And we've never been able to find out exactly what this business was. It's kind of actually pre-Google. But we still have always really loved this name, and we've kept it for a long time because it articulates something really central about our creative approach in general, which is that we always want to remain in a constant and active and dynamic dialogue with the tools that we use. And try to be mindful of the push and pull between using a tool to make something and then allowing that tool to shape the final form of the work. And if the tool is going to shape the final form of the work, then we want to be mindful of what that is and what's happening, and that it's a conscious choice and not the consequence of some limitation of our approach and our thinking. And part of that is just taking risks regularly, trying new things, implementing new tools as regularly as they come along. We have managed to survive doing music for many years. We've toured around the world in many different configurations, and we've done more sort of extracurricular projects than I really have the time to tell you about right now. I mean, everything from large-scale public art activation to merchandising and web design to experimental performance and video and other weird, unclassifiable projects. And in that time, we've also released 7 albums, all of which are very different from one another, because we've always thought of an album as something that is more than just a collection of songs. An album is a way to capture a moment in time, capture a scene, an approach, a kind of sensibility, a set of creative tools, and not only sort of memorialize that moment in a semi-permanent record, but also to create a kind of context around which a larger conversation can occur, both about the themes of the album and how it impacts its immediate community, and a context around which to extrapolate even more new ideas, because albums are traditionally made kind of in cycles. So you record, you release something, you tour, maybe for 2 years, maybe 3 years if you're lucky, and then you record again and you start all over again. And your relationship to the material changes over that time. Sometimes, after the end of the 3 years or 2 years of touring an album, you have a completely different relationship to the material as when you were recording it. And in a sense, you don't really fully understand your own work until you've gone through that whole cycle, until you've performed it and discussed it and seen how it's interpreted by other people. So we're kind of in phase 1 of that right now with Chain Tripping. It was released in August, and we're still 100% unpacking how the creative process has affected us, how it will affect our work moving forward. But I'm going to tell you about how it began, because that I can at least talk about. So it began about 3 years ago with a simple and extremely naive question, which was, can we make a YACHT record using artificial intelligence? And we didn't really know anything about what was possible or what that question even meant. But we did know a few things. We knew that if we were going to make a YACHT record using artificial intelligence, that it had to kind of go beyond generative ambient music. We didn't want to make like an experimental harsh noise album. We didn't want to make something that kind of just technically qualified as music, just as some kind of publicity stunt or as some kind of experimental thing. We wanted to make an AI record that was properly a YACHT album, not just some object, but something we could have a relationship to. Because we're working artists, we tour, we play songs, we try to sell records to people, we try to get people to come to concerts. So we needed something that was going to connect with audiences authentically, that would make sense as part of our catalog, that would make sense as the next step in our history, something that would be both the sort of accumulation of our past, but a reinterpretation that would feel new and an evolution, and something that we could actually perform and sing and play and mean, not something completely impersonal. Which basically means that we wanted to make something that sounded like us and not like software. And this was complicated by the fact that we are not coders, we're artists. And our relationship to technology, even though we've always been really engaged, and I think we're a little bit ahead of like other bands maybe in this department, it's always been from the outside looking in. And we're always trying to figure out what free and adaptable consumer level tools can be adapted to our purposes of distributing and producing independent music. We try to use things a little bit sideways and kind of bend and bootleg things to make them work for us. And so going into this project, A, we knew very little about machine learning, and B, we didn't quite know how we would begin to learn more. And a lot of our assumptions about what machine learning was, or about what AI was, were fueled, like a lot of people, by pop culture and media and science fiction, and were, of course, deeply wrong. The first and most major assumption is just that AI is a thing, like an AI, that you could put a pronoun before it and call it something. It's not, obviously, it's not a thing, but a highly complicated set of processes that have many different applications. So that was our first lesson. The second lesson was we began with this assumption that we would be able to process raw audio in some way, that we could give our songs as MP3s or whatever to an AI or an algorithm, and that it would spit out new songs for us that were finished, and that we would have to just release, and the art would be about kind of committing to that and pretending like it was our own. But we quickly found out a lot of things that wasn't possible, and we found out that the computing requirements necessary to train machine learning models to generate raw audio are, of course, so significant that the few models we could find that processed raw audio relied on really low sample rates, and the output that they ultimately generated was kind of not, in our minds, compatible from a sonic perspective with the production of a studio album. So I'll give you an example. It was fascinating, though, because we started playing around with these tools early on. And here's what a sample RNN, which is a raw audio processing machine learning model, trained on our own back catalog, gave us as a new sort of hallucination of what YACHT could sound like in the future. It's interesting. I mean, it sounds like a ghost voice from another dimension. And when we first heard it, we were so kind of touched and frightened by this idea of this machine voice coming from this other side of us, from some other, on the other side of an impermeable membrane between us and another world, and we could just barely hear it coming out, and all of these things were kind of romantic to us. And we listened through a lot of stuff that sounded like this and developed a kind of affinity for it, but of course you can't really make a pop record with sounds like that. We also worked with a pair of creative technologists in California who call themselves Dada Bots. This is their black metal logo. It's cooler, I think. And they did the same thing for us. They helped us train a number of sounds from individual stems from our back catalog, so individual instruments, not songs, again, using a model called Sample RNN. And we spent a long time trying to figure out how to work with these sounds, because we kind of liked a lot of things about them. We liked how they handled timing, or rather didn't handle timing. So I'm going to play you a sound generated that's trained on a single cowbell hit. So just one cowbell hit. This is what the output sounds like. So in the original stem that we gave them, it was just a single cowbell hit, but for some reason, the model generated this weird kind of repetitive sound, stretched out and recompiled with more hits, and just a completely different understanding of what timing represents. And we liked that. We liked that its relationship to timing was so wonky. But ultimately, again, this sound was sort of too recognizable as a sample RNN sound, and not recognizable as us. And so we decided against relying on these raw audio techniques. But we did include some of them in the album as texture, because they are interesting. But our primary use of machine learning on making this album was on a symbolic level. So not to generate sounds, but to generate notes and words. So I'll start with the notes. Again, we're not coders, so when we were going into this, we were looking for a free and relatively user-friendly tool that would allow us to use machine learning at a symbolic level to generate notes and patterns and melodies, and give us a good amount of control over both the input and the output. And that tool turned out to be Magenta's music VAE model. And this is what that tool looked like when we brought it into the studio. So not exactly rock and roll, a spreadsheet, basically, a Jupyter notebook, which is not the kind of thing that musicians usually bring with them into the studio. And we certainly had our share of struggles trying to understand how to incorporate this into our workflow. And of course, since we finished the album, Magenta has made this tool available as a free plugin on Ableton Live, which is the music software that we use to make music, which would have been really helpful at the time. But that sometimes when you're an innovator, you have to deal with the hard stuff. So we had the somewhat ungainly task of working with this, but it was really useful for us because music VAE is a latent space interpolation model. And so it allowed us to take pairs of musical patterns from our own back catalogs, or from our own history, and explore this psychedelic high-dimensional mathematical space that exists in between them. And we're really fascinated by that as a concept, because for us, it's like a way of exploring all of the paths that we didn't take in the past and exploring melodies that are basically hidden in between melodies that we've already written. So this kind of way of collaborating with another dimension version of ourselves that exists in some other path. But in order to do that, we had to do a lot of prep. This is a little bit unglamorous and tedious, but of course you can't just give an MP3 to a model like this. It works with symbolic data with MIDI, which is the computer sheet music. So we don't have sheet music for our back catalog. We have 82 songs. We have almost 18 years worth of output, but we don't have it notated. So we had to go back through all of our songs, and again, 82 songs over 17 years, and each of one of these songs may have dozens and dozens of different musical patterns in them: drum patterns, keyboard lines, guitar melodies, bass lines, etc. And we had to manually annotate them into MIDI. We essentially had to turn our music back into data before we could do anything else. And then we separated out all of those patterns, broke them up into short clips, 2 and 16 bar clips, that we could run through the model. And then we ran pairs of those clips through the model again and again and again at different temperatures, essentially generating a massive collection of melodic patterns, melodic output in the form of MIDI. And we did that before we even stepped into the studio. So on the first day of recording, we brought this massive folder full of MIDI files, some of which were just endless sequences of notes that kind of meandered and went nowhere, and began to just listen to them, began to kind of audition them from latent space and listen for things that we thought sounded interesting, sounded unusual, sounded like us but different, that made us excited. We use basically our unique human capacities, our axiological capacity to say, I like this, or this is good, or this is interesting, or this is beautiful. And then we took those selections and cut them up, looped them, arranged them, manually structured them into songs, like putting together a puzzle from 1,000 different puzzle boxes. And when we started working, at least, I mean, maybe Doug can speak to this later, but using machine learning to generate a new song with structure, melody, lyrics, everything that constitutes a song was difficult. But we saw that, if not impossible, but we saw that as an opportunity, a way to collaborate with the system. So generating these sort of initial melodies, these initial patterns, source patterns, that was the model's job. But everything else that constitutes making a song, so arrangement, production, performance, instrumentation, all of these things, those were up to us. So we would listen to these MIDI patterns, we would determine what instrument suited them, if they would be vocal melodies, drum patterns, keyboards, vocals, etc., arrange them, and then perform everything live. This is all kind of high level, so just to demonstrate what I mean, let's focus on a single melody so you can see what happens. So this is a pattern I'm going to play you that was produced by the Music VAE model. It's just a small segment of a much longer pattern, and one of several that resulted from an interpolation between 2 songs from 2 different eras of the band. And we like this idea of kind of cross-sampling between different points in our own history. So here's the melody. So as you can see, I mean, we found this melody exceptionally interesting aesthetically. We liked the way it felt, but there's not a lot to hang on to. It's just like this sequence of notes. In fact, when I first met Doug, he was talking about how sometimes these models generate like music falling down the stairs, which I feel like is a really good way of describing some of this stuff. It's music, but it doesn't have the kinds of patterns that we are accustomed to hearing in music. It doesn't have that structure that locks us into a melody and keeps us engaged. It just keeps going and going. So this is where the rules come in. And by rules, I don't mean like technical rules at all. I mean very sort of human, creative, working, personal rules. So as artists, and I think this is true for a lot of artists, we've always thrived under different constraints. It's useful to have parameters when you're making something. You can't just enter the studio and decide to write a song about anything with all the tools available, or you will have a nervous breakdown. So we decided on some pretty simple ground rules. The first being that every single melody on the album had to be an interpolation from 2 different melodies from our own past. So it had to be something that came from our history, from our output. And that we hoped would sort of result in songs that felt like us in some way, that would have this kind of undefinable yacht feeling to them, which we hoped would, we hope this process would help us to understand ourselves. In that way, it didn't. It did in other ways. We also decided that we couldn't add any notes whatsoever. So that melody you heard, we had to use it as it was. We couldn't add any notes. We couldn't add harmonies. of any kind. So if we heard a harmony in our heads that we thought would sound good, we just couldn't use it. We couldn't jam or improvise or basically do any of the fun stuff that is normally a part of generating material to make an album with. But we could do other things. We could choose instruments, so we could assign the melodies to different instruments. We could transpose the melodies to a different key, our working key for the song. And we could cut things up all we wanted. And that's the important thing, is this kind of structure. The creative approach was really mostly about structuring and arranging. And that helped us from being kind of overwhelmed by the sheer volume of material that these models can generate. I mean, you press go and you get thousands of notes if you want to. So we wanted to keep it pretty reined in. Okay, now let's talk about lyrics, which emerged from a independent process that is kind of similar in some ways. So for this project, we collaborated with an artist technologist named Ross Goodwin. He's an amazing person, a great artist, and he came across our radar initially because he had made a film called Sunspring. Have you seen Sunspring? It's kind of an iconic AI film. Fine, it's on YouTube. It's basically a film where he trained a machine learning model on a bunch of different science fiction screenplays from the past. And then that model generated a new science fiction screenplay, which is then filmed and acted by actors. What's interesting about it, among many things, is that it's meaningless. Like nothing makes any sense. It's all gobbledygook nonsense. It's crazy. But because the actors are talented and because they made some effort to kind of frame and set things up in a natural way, you feel like something is happening. There's so much meaning in the way that people say things that you almost believe that the film is about something and not nonsense. And we were struck when we were watching it, like how big that space is actually between what we say and how we say it. And it struck us that a lot of human meaning kind of lives in that ambiguous space between what's written and how it's performed. And we figured that lyrics, performing song lyrics would present us with a really interesting opportunity to play with that. So we defined a 20 megabyte, which is a significant amount of lyrics, corpus of lyrics from bands that we loved. So we went through our history, and we went through our record shelf, and we went through our MP3s, and we looked at every single band we'd ever loved, basically. Everything we grew up listening to, all the music our friends made, all the music our parents listened to growing up, everything that could ever have been part of our creative process in some way. We made this massive corpus. And then Ross trained a character recurrent neural network, which is a text generating model, on all of these lyrics. And after some tweaks and refinements and some back and forth, he basically sent us a massive file of output, which included both lyrics and song titles. And an interesting thing about this is that the lyrics that he gave us included text at a range of temperatures. So are you familiar with the concept of temperature in machine learning? Neither am I, don't worry. But basically, it means that at a low temperature, when a machine learning model is generating text or anything, it's taking less risks. So it's generating more predictable stuff, essentially. And at a high temperature, it's taking more risks, and it's generating less predictable stuff. And for us, that kind of translates loosely to like weirdness. High temperature is weirder than low temperature. In the context of lyrics, text output that's trained has low temperature tends to be quite repetitive, and so it feels kind of punk rock. It has this elemental kind of repetitive kind of lizard brain. A lot of commands like this: stab a crack, stab a crack, stab a cop. There was one section of the document that was just 15 pages of "I want your brain" over and over again. It's really kind of scary coming from an AI model. And the higher temperature stuff was like way more unpredictable, full of like weird proper nouns like clack John Willows of tall Lee, and these long rambling nonsensical sequences that kind of felt like maybe like more narrative in a way, almost like country music, but obviously again extra dimensional country music. And the range between this low temperature and this high temperature material in the text kind of struck us as the difference between a verse and a chorus. Choruses tend to be much more simple. So we ended up sampling high temperature material and low temperature material in this process to assemble songs that had a little bit of a range of both, a range of feeling. We printed the output that Ross gave us on a single sheet of dot matrix printer paper, which we brought into the studio with us. So this is like the source text, the ur text. Every single word on the album is in this text. And we love the idea that although we were using a really high-tech process to generate these lyrics, that the experience of working with the material would be really tactile and really analog and like really lo-fi. And that's kind of our mantra, is high-tech, lo-fi. And as with the melodies, we didn't take anything as is. We had the same rules. We couldn't add anything, but we could structure and cut up and rearrange. So I literally sat on the floor of our studio with a highlighter for a week, just going through this massive document, highlighting individual sentences I thought were interesting or beautiful. And we did the same thing. We rearranged it and cut up and assembled it into songs. And the biggest influence on this process wasn't really a technical influence at all. It was much more inspired by like aleatoric and cut-up writing techniques that were first used, of course, by artists and poets in the 1920s, these Dadaist poetry techniques. According to Tristan Tzara, to Pour faire un poème dadaïste, you simply take a newspaper, you cut up all the individual letters, you put it in a bag, you shake it up, you dump it on a table, and you rearrange it as it goes. That's how you write a poem using Dada strategies. And I think this was like obviously really compelling to us because that's essentially what we're doing with these text generating models, just at a sort of meta level at a much larger scale. And the same technique was used by a lot of great artists, in the 20th century, William Burroughs, and more relevant to our interests, it was used exclusively for many years by the great David Bowie, who was a great and avid enthusiast of both cut-up writing methods, and he was an early adopter of technology. So in the 70s, he was doing manual cut-ups, and in the 90s, he was using a piece of software that he actually co-designed with a developer in San Francisco called the Verbicizer, which would split sentences from newspapers into different columns and rearrange them to create what Bowie called a kaleidoscope of meanings. And then he would rearrange that into different songs, which is why his lyrics are so great. And you can sort of see that kaleidoscope of meanings in a way in our lyrics as well. So here's an example of some lyrics that were generated by Ross's model, which we then manually arranged into a passage. I want your phone to my brain. That's Google, right? That's what you do. I want you to call my name. I want you to do it too. Oh, won't you come? Won't you come? Won't you work on my head? Be my number 9. To be alive, to be with you like a weed. I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed. So making songs was a process of combining these kind of discovered poems with the melodies that we generated and sort of breaking these words onto the melodies that we generated, sort of forcing this uneasy cohabitation of text, a melody which reads on the album as a kind of weirdness or wonkiness. And speaking as someone who ordinarily writes songs that are bound to things like meaning and narrative, it was really challenging to work in this way, to essentially experience lyrics primarily as sounds before I could think about them as meaningful. And in fact, it turns out that actually really helps to write songs, and a lot of successful pop songwriters do this. I mean, Dr. Luke, the Swedish producer, has a process. What, is it not Dr. Luke? Max Martin has a process where he does this, he calls it melodic math, which essentially he has certain sounds he knows sound good with certain notes, and he puts them on a chart and he rearranges them, and it doesn't matter what they mean at all, which is why most pop songs are nonsense. Okay, so now let's hear how these lyrics actually fit onto the melody that I played you earlier.
I want your phone to my brain. I want you to call my name. I want you to do it too. Oh, won't you come, won't you come, won't you work on my head? Be my number 9 to be alive, to be with you like a weed. I can feel it in my head like a dog in bed. And every time runs back to the bottom.
So one of the most interesting parts of this process for me, and I think for my mates as well, was actually performing the generated material. Because for one, it was often beyond, and we're not virtuosic players at all, we all come from punk rock, so it was beyond often our core competencies. And even the things that sounded, that sounds easy enough, right? Are actually like brain-breakingly difficult to play because they just don't come from the human body. We realize in this process that when normally we sit down to write music, we're like doing things which feel natural, which feel good in the moment, feel good in the room, which come from years and years of playing and doing things which turns out are actually kind of these crutches or these things that we rely on in our bodies that feel really natural to us. But something that is quite simple that's generated by a machine, just because of the way it emerged into this world, it's just weirdly hard to play. It works against established and embodied patterns that we have. So it was really a struggle. And then there were some certain parts, for example, like very, very simple drum patterns, which my bandmates spent 30, 45 minutes trying to figure out, just because it was like slightly off tempo in a way that didn't feel right. And that was really like super fun, extremely frustrating, of course. But when we would get it, we would have this amazing feeling of accomplishment, because not only did we learn how to play something new, but we learned how to play something that like was completely counter to our embodied experience of playing music, and perhaps, hopefully, broke us out of our established patterns and brought new patterns into our bodies, which can then become part of our arsenal, and so on forever. And for what it's worth, even though we were often struggling while making this album, for us, the best art comes from that. Like, I love listening to music that is made by people who are just reaching at something that they can't quite reach, Like, the best music is music made by people who are struggling to reach beyond their grasp, because we're always better when we're trying to reach beyond what is possible. So every note and every word on the album was generated by a machine learning model. And that doesn't mean that it's somehow automated, right? It's still completely our music. It's still completely YACHT. And we could have given the same source material to 100 different bands and gotten 100 wildly different albums, because of course, making an album, making any art, requires thousands and thousands of choices every day. Choices about instrumentation and production and performance and arrangement, all these little things. And every single one of those choices and all the consequences that emerge from every single one of those choices can only emerge from the individuals making those choices. So we thought that working with machine learning would help us sort of understand some secret formula about who we are as artists. But as it turns out, that is the formula. Like, who we are is the choices that we make in any given moment. And that's all it is. For us, it's really important that when working with AI, when working with machine learning, that the output of the models, like what the models spit out, is not the end of the process. And there's a lot of interesting work, I think, in the sort of art and technology world of, oh, we trained a machine learning model and it spat out this. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that funny? Isn't that weird? But for us, great art comes from a few more iterations, a few more steps to the process. So, these models are really good at kind of being the mega Dada poem machine. They're really good at shuffling up the world in weird combinations, new novel combinations, and kind of tearing everything apart and dumping it on the table. But our job as people and as artists is to actually, look at that chaos and reconstitute it into something beautiful, into something meaningful, to give it purpose and pattern, and to embody and then convincingly inhabit that pattern until it becomes part of us. I'm going to go through this really quickly because we don't have a ton of time, but I want to show some of the visual work that came alongside of the album. Records are often a showcase for so many non-musical things, artwork, videos, all that stuff. So we knew from the outset that we wanted to use this album as a kind of gallery for a lot of artists in the space that we really admire. So the album cover, for example, was created by an artist in New Zealand named Tom White, who uses what he calls adversarial perception engines that are trained on different image data sets and create these kind of painterly abstractions that machine vision systems recognize as the actual image, if that makes sense. So we identified images from every single one of our songs, and then Tom created these abstractions for us. So this is the album cover. It's a satellite. If you feed this to Google image, reverse image search, it'll see it as a satellite. This is a pair of boots. These are eyes. That's a little bit more obvious. We worked with a couple of different really interesting people to create machine learning driven typography tools. So we collaborated with a studio called Counterpoint Studio to create an open source typography tool called BitTripper that allows you to explore this sort of vast space in between different bit forms, in between these kind of lo-fi, old school bit typefaces that are generated by GAN models. And we love this idea that our music, which emerged from a kind of process, this in-betweeny process of navigating space in between melodies, could be expressed in these in-betweeny font faces. We also combined them with a lot of vector fonts that were created by a team at Google here, including Doug Eck, but also a number of other people, and then sort of using our unique collagist sensibility, rearrange them into different patterns. All the tools in all the typography in this presentation is machine learning generated. Again, output is not the end of the process. The word mark and some of the lyric videos were created using machine learning. This is a type called Obsolete by a designer in London named Barney McCann. And we had been really fortunate to collaborate with a lot of great people. This is a latent space representation of me and my two bandmates traveling through latent space. It was created by a German artist named Mario Klingemann, who's one of the great artists in this field right now. We've been using these photos as our press portraits, and it drives my mother insane because she thinks I look like a monster. One of our most recent collaborations is with a video artist in Los Angeles who doesn't at all work in the world of machine learning. She's a old school broadcast cameras, analog video person. So this is footage that was filmed using a 1970s era directly to tape camera, processed through a pose detection model, through dense pose, and then run back through a 50-year-old video synthesizer. So we think it's the first time that an AI model and this old school video synthesis technique has ever been combined. And I think what's interesting to us about this, and the reason I want to show you to it really quickly, is that the future is not some clean slate. It's not something that everything is brand new. And there was a really great interview with William Gibson some years ago in the Paris Review about this. He was talking about how Blade Runner was his favorite movie because it was the first sci-fi movie where the past, the present, and the future all cohabitate in the same place. It's this sort of compost heap of history where all these things are on top of each other. And of course, that's what's most exciting about the future for us. It's not that there's all this new stuff that's coming along that's going to obliterate everything that came before. It's that all this new stuff provides an opportunity for everything old, all these old approaches, all these old technologies, all these old techniques to kind of be reactivated and be given new purpose and new context. And that the relationship between all the things that have ever been made will continue to become more dense and more interrelated and more interesting over time as more things enter into that fray. So the new reactivates the old, which is why we like to do this kind of thing. The last thing I want to say about this is sort of a bigger picture, which is that machine learning models, of course, rely on a large amount of historical data to make their classifications and predictions. And so I think it's helpful to think about AI not necessarily as a tool for inventing the future, but as a tool that allows us to understand and recontextualize the past. That's what it's been for us. It's been a tool that has allowed us to understand who we are and where we come from because we have imbued it with so much of our past. And as a species, our data contains the best and the worst of us. And it strikes me that when AI goes wrong, when it's like when models are reinforcing problematic biases and affecting marginalized people in the real world, it's when we're blindly projecting our past into the future without any self-analysis, without reckoning with our mistakes, and without using the mirror that we've actually built to see ourselves more clearly. We thought going into this process that we would make something new, and we did, but we did it because we were drawing from our history. Machine learning for us has widened our capacity to explore everything we've ever loved, everything we've ever listened to and done before. And I think if we use these tools with the right spirit, they can help us to understand how we've arrived at where we are. And then, only then, and maybe we can move forward into the future. Thank you.
So we're going to end on time here, but I want to ask a couple of questions of Claire and then open the floor to questions from the audience. But first, I'd like to ask if we could listen to about 30 seconds of Downtown Dancing to set up my question. This is the first song on the album, right?
Correct.
Welcome to your pleasure. Just don't make a sound.
Great baseline.
Welcome to your pleasure. Just don't make a sound.
Okay.
It sounds great in this room.
Sounds good.
This is the
It'll
intended
sound
context.
even
It's definitely
better.
it's not meant for like a nightclub. It has to be listened
That's right. You should all be
in a
sitting,
basement
right?
conference room at a low volume.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so first, first a simple question, like where's the AI in that segment?
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere, okay.
Yeah, so the baseline was generated. Do you remember what it was interpolated from, the baseline?
Do you guys have a mic over there, I think, if you need one? If you need it.
So the baseline is an interpolation between two melodies, which weren't necessarily baselines from previous Yacht songs. So two different patterns from previous Yacht songs.
So the baseline comes from Music VAE.
Yeah,
right?
The drum pattern also comes from Music VAE.
So that cowbell is actually machine learning generated?
Donna, he's asking you.
Yes.
The cowbell is machine learning. Is that a microphone?
This is a microphone, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you want one to perform with?
No, I thought it was like a beach ball that you throw at people so that they know that they're being heard. It's actually a microphone.
Yeah. So answer to question number one, I don't remember which two patterns were interpolated to make the bass line, but I do remember having to learn how to play it, which was incredibly difficult and to this day painful. Like when we perform it live, it hurts my shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need an AI robot.
Yeah. And the cowbell pattern, do you remember what it came from? No.
Well, there's not much to it. It's just, but it doubles after a while. I'm like, did the AI double that pattern?
Yeah. Well, something that we thought was interesting too was selecting patterns that were a little bit dumb. Because when we're writing songs, there's always like a little bit of cleverness involved or something. Like you wouldn't make something so blatantly stupid. Right. So AI allowed us to make those choices, like the cowbell pattern.
Yeah, no, I get it. Okay, so this actually brings up a question that I have for later. But you're all in love with the glitchiness of it all, right?
Yeah.
But what happens, what happens if we get really good at this? Are you bored then?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, no, I think we talk about this a lot, but what is compelling to us about AI at this particular moment, and again, my opinion may change. Obviously, the technology is developing so quickly, it's really difficult to keep track sometimes. But what is compelling to us about it now is that the output is just genuinely weird, sometimes dumb, sometimes wonky, sideways, just failing at what it's trying to do, but in the process creating something that is interesting and just not necessarily forwards or backwards, but 2 steps to the right of anything that we would write. Just outside of the realm, just beyond, on the other side of the fence of something that seems normal. And that is what's interesting about it. When it becomes, perfect, whatever that means, I think we will have less delight in the discovery of those patterns. But maybe it'll be useful in other ways. Maybe we can then actually automate ourselves out of employment.
That may be my last question about this. So you have these lyrics. I have this serious question. I hope I can ask it fast because I want to leave room. But when my cell phone dies, I feel 20% or 30% stupider. But when my cell phone's working, I actually start to trust that it's an extension of myself. So if I think I know how to navigate Paris, like that I know how to navigate Paris. I have no earthly idea how to navigate Paris. My phone knows how to do it for me. And I have to wonder, like so these lyrics, right? These lyrics from Ross, like you've been singing them now for what, 3 months?
Yeah, and now I feel like I wrote them.
Yeah, that's it. That's my question. Okay,
yes.
yeah, and do they mean something to you now too?
This is a very, we're human beings, we do this. Like, as soon as you have something and you make it part of your life in some way, you're like, this is mine, I invented this, you know? I'm the first person to ever do this. It's a natural thing. But no, the interesting thing about it is that, you know, by singing these songs, on paper they have a certain meaning, like anyone can read and interpret them however you like. I make choices in how I sing them, like how I break the lyrics, how I emote. What's happening when I'm singing them. In my mind, there is a narrative that changes from night to night as I have developed a greater understanding of what I think these songs are about. But I am trying to communicate something very specific when I'm performing this.
You realize
and other performers
how strange that is, right? At some level, right?
The weirdest.
Right.
But I have that relationship to songs that I wrote, you know, like there's songs that we've been playing on tour for 10 years, 15 years that I have sung probably thousands of times. And over the course of those years, that song has meant 100 different things to me. It has meant different things as I've grown older, as my perspective on my own past has changed, as people have told me what the song means to them. Like, meaning is fluid. Meaning is very fluid. And whether it came from me at some point when I was 22 or it came from a machine last week, it kind of feels the same sometimes. And the cool thing is that in the process of singing generated lyrics, I'm projecting meaning onto them in the same way that fans of music have been projecting meaning onto the songs they love since the beginning of time, right? Like, we're all in it together in the nice way. Like, now us and the audience are all trying to understand what this means together, rather than like kids at home being like, I wonder what Kurt Cobain meant when he wrote that, you know?
Fair enough. So, all right, so your book, right?
Oh, okay.
Just for a second. We don't have time to talk very long about your book, but people should read your book, Broadband, which is a pun in English, which you can figure out for yourselves later if you're not an Anglophone. So there's Ada Lovelace, there's Wendy Hall with hypertext, there's Jamie Levy with Plato. This is my generation too, like BBS systems.
Yeah.
And like fundamentally, part of who you are as a writer, right? And I have to wonder as I see this presentation if this YACHT experiment isn't as much literature as it is music.
I hope it is. I mean, I've always defined myself as the writer in the band. Singing is the thing that I'm worst at. I always joke about how it's like it's ridiculous that on paper I'm professionally a singer, because it's like, of all the things I know how to do, definitely the thing I'm not good at.
I respectfully disagree, but
well, yeah, but it's convenient to write songs that are in your own range, of course. You know, call me after we've done karaoke for a few hours. Okay, I might have changed my mind. But yeah, no, I think a lot of our projects are literary in a way. I mean, I think music is absolutely a form of writing, both in terms of how we write lyrics, but also how we communicate what the music is about and what it means. There are a lot of opportunities for essentially literary approaches.
I love that. I want to make sure that we leave. I have one more thing I want to play for you all, but I want to we can interleave this. Any questions? John has there's lots of questions. I may not get my thing played. Let's just go with these questions. Let's see what happens here.
I want to throw this. Check. Yeah. Works.
Wow, I can't believe it's okay.
Yeah. We discussed about the fact that you use the AI for, finding the melody, the lyrics and stuff, but it's not part of the recording process. It's more than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's say the sound engineering, the mastering and stuff. Would you imagine using AI for that kind of activity too? Meaning that eventually from the very beginning to the mastering process, we would eventually find a way to have AI all along the way, and meaning that there would be no need for humans eventually. Because I guess there's part of craftsmanship, in the fact when you build a song, when you mix everything, and we would need a data set eventually. I'm not sure it would be easy to find such a data set, but could we imagine that, and what would be your feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, over the course of researching it, we saw this project as an opportunity to try to figure out like what the state of the art was in AI and all these different little micro fields that were adjacent to music. So we looked at some kind of AI-driven mastering things, and nothing was like good enough for us to use at this point. Maybe in the future we would implement them, but I mean, I don't know. I think that those spaces are also spaces where human intervention can be really useful and nice. And there's so much choice, and there's so many decisions that we make as people about production and engineering that are a big part of what we consider to be the creative process. And I think what's fun is maybe introducing machine learning into different parts of the process so that you can be freed up to explore other things that you maybe haven't had the time or the sort of mental bandwidth to lose yourself in previous iterations. So like maybe in the future we'll have, you know, an AI master the album so that we can focus way more on the engineering, or we'll have an AI engineer the album so we can focus on the mastering. You know, like I like the idea of sort of creating spaces to open up and make yourself more free, but I don't like the idea of closing all the spaces off completely, because then what's the point? Then I might as well just work in a shoe store or something, you know?
Next question in the interest of time.
So you can kind of think of a song going on this literary analogy of a kind of narrative. And then there's a kind of question both about the song level, but also the album level, about the consistency that there is within a song or even across the album. Is that something that was to some extent given to you by the nature of using those models? Or was that very much a conscious choice? Could it have gone like much wilder, much more varied?
Yeah, absolutely. It could have gone either way. I mean, and there's lots of stuff that we ended up scrapping that was like, you know, we were just exploring what was possible and trying things and all kinds of seeing like, well, maybe we'll make a techno record. Maybe that's what this is. Or maybe we'll make, you know, a much heavier rock album. Ultimately, the sound that emerged was the sound that felt right for the material. It had this kind of subtlety to it, this kind of like sweet, soft wonkiness that felt right to us based on what we were working with. But there's certainly many different directions it could have gone. And in fact, like previous albums that like we have written by ourselves have had much more internal variety sonically than this record. But I think there was something to keeping it feeling consistent on this album just because of the complexity of the process involved. Yeah.
Let me jump back in with one, and we'll still have time for a couple more questions. This one is actually, I just want you to hear a little bit more of their music from this fantastic album. And in your mind, think about the idea of what their constraints were, the rules that they had, right? They could cut, they could choose, they could transpose, right? And I feel like some of these pieces of music really have musical motion. They're going, I mean, they all feel like they're going somewhere, but some of them work in ways that I find really surprising. So now I'd like you to play the main part from Death, like starting at about 17 seconds in.
It's just a strange enchanter, a strange empty state. It's just a strange standing there. It's just a sudden turn, another break in the sky. She don't wanna go. She wants to say hello.
But I just feel like there's a motion there. There's a move. Who's the second voice in there? Right. Good job, Rob. Rob gets some applause.
That song has like the most sort of like edgy lyric on the entire album, which is "Stab a Cop."
I only mentioned it because I felt like there was. I don't know if you want to comment on this or the creation process, but like the movement, the change, it felt like it had a musical arc to it that really.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that emerge organically. I mean, obviously, like I'm sitting on the floor with a highlighter looking for lyrics. These guys are collaging these patterns together into songs, and when there's a song that feels a certain way, I'm looking for a lyric that is correspondent to that feeling. So they were kind of writing this like Fleetwood Mac song, basically, and so I was looking for things that felt like that, you know, that had that kind of like Wild and Woolly mid-70s feeling to them. With the exception of Stab a Cop, which is more contemporary.
Well, it was happening in the 70s too.
It's true.
You were too young. Questions from the audience?
What about the namings? Like names for the tracks and for the album itself? How were they chosen?
The album was actually named using GPT-2, which is a more sophisticated text generating model that emerged after we were finished with the process of writing and naming the songs. It's an open AI product. It's like trained on the entire internet. People are terrified it's going to like replace language essentially and fill the internet with plausible nonsense. I don't know how legitimate that fear is, but
illegitimate.
Jonna spent probably, 2 months just entering different weird prompts into this GPT-2 model. Things like the new album by Yacht is called blank, and then letting the model complete, and then generating, I think he probably had like 2,000, 6,000. He generated 6,000 possibilities of album titles. We also, our friend Ross, who created the lyrics with us, also a couple different processes as well. He had a model that was trained on film titles from IMDb. He had a model that he tried to train on song titles as well. But ultimately, we couldn't find anything we liked with those. But the GPT-2 model generated just, thousands of interesting viable possibilities. And it was almost impossible to pick the title because they were all equally kind of like, just okay. They were all kind of like, yeah, that could be an album title, but nothing we really loved. Are you going to read some?
No, I could just show, these are all album titles.
There were a few contenders, but chain tripping we chose chain tripping because it felt like kind of in some way like a description of the process. Like we were kind of doing these sequential trips through our own back catalog, but also because we Googled chain tripping and the only two things that came up were a very old YouTube video with like 12 views on it of some guys in a factory like throwing a chain around a piston. And then like one article on this like drug message board about taking LSD over and over again, chain tripping. And we were like, that's cool. That's we can own this SEO.
Come back to for a second on you're saying that some of the music that the process generated was really hard to play. Mm-hmm. Did you rule out songs because you felt you just couldn't play them, or are some of the songs in the album unplayable and
It's funny when you're recording something, you don't think about what it's gonna be like to play it live. You just think, well, let's add tracks, let's add this really complicated bass line, this is gonna sound great. And then by the time you're done with the album, you realize, oh shit, this is actually gonna be really hard to play every night, which is something that we are struggling through right now. But no, I mean, there's nothing that we didn't include because it was too hard. The things that were too hard ultimately were just, that was the challenge, was learning how to play them, helping ourselves get better at music. I mean, we don't want to do things because they're easy. We want to do things because they're hard.
And if I can just add a comment, what I found so interesting about your talk was, some of us followed here that Google was involved through DeepMind in artificial intelligence for learning how to play chess better. And sort of your comments about deconstructing how you play music and thinking about it sort of backwards, cutting it up, I think was also one of the outcomes of that incredible chess algorithm that, beat the strongest chess network. It was the DeepMind algorithm played chess in ways that humans that were used to thinking about the history of chess and that embedded knowledge, that was a constraint that the algorithm didn't have. So I see a big parallel with your work.
Totally. I think about the chess analogy a lot because I think there's always been this thinking sort of historically with AI that like you're building these models that are going to do something better than any human ever has, like win at Jeopardy, at Go, or at chess or whatever. And like once you accomplish that, once you create the best chess playing AI in the world, like it doesn't make chess irrelevant. It doesn't like remove anyone's interest in playing chess. It like ticks some kind of box, but then it leaves the rest of chess to us to continue to reinvent and enjoy, I'm just saying it doesn't make chess obsolete. It just makes chess more interesting.
There's two questions. Okay. Go ahead. No. Yeah. Conten's next.
Hello. So did you teach the algorithm music theory, like chord progression and stuff like that?
There's almost no chords on the album. There's what, two? Two songs have chords because the model that we were using,
right? That's
the model that we were using couldn't generate chords. So we did kind of a bootleg thing where we sort of we took drum patterns and then transposed those into chords. But yeah, we used like what was the chord thing that we used? Like a very early prototype of a magenta chord model, but only for a couple of songs. So yeah, the album is almost entirely chord free, which turns out you don't need them.
While he's bringing that, is there any chance you'd play one of the songs tomorrow night?
Oh, I'm like, not right now.
No, in French. You have a couple, at least one?
Yeah, we have one song in French, yeah. We'll play it. We'll play it, of course.
Oh, check it out, I got to make a request.
It's already in the set list.
Oh, I see. Check it out, I got to pretend I made a request.
Hello. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. This was very inspiring. I have a quick question on the social context. So when you think of the artists that you took inspiration from the lyrics perspective, so these guys are coming from very different periods of time and places all around the world. And basically what the machine is giving you back is rearrangements of all this input coming from very different social contexts.
Yes.
Do you feel that by using this, you're extracting yourself from the current social context?
That's interesting. No, I've never thought about it in that way. I mean, I think of it as a way of collaborating with artists throughout history simultaneously. I mean, this is kind of like delightful possibility of like, I can somehow take the best of everything I've ever loved and teach a model language based on only that, and then use it to make something new. And I think it's kind of a combination of things in a way. I mean, it's pulling from history, but it's also using a technology that's uniquely of the present. So I feel like it's in conversation with the present moment, sort of formally, and maybe like spiritually or emotionally in conversation with the past.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I was wondering, so you were talking at the end about how it felt weird now to feel like you wrote these lyrics, even though they were generated. But at the same time, you were saying, you chose the lyrics highlighting on a paper, etc. So you had a lot of input. So I guess how different does it feel to do that from like, picking in your brain for new inspiration?
Yeah, it's funny actually. I mean, I'm a writer, as well professionally, and writing is editing. I mean, all good writing is editing, and it's the same to me. It's just like a lot of the meaning making comes from the arranging and the cutting up. So I do feel like I wrote it, and I don't think it's that different. I mean, normally you go into the studio with a notebook full of ideas with thoughts and little poetic sentences that come to your spirit or something, and then you work from that. You cut and paste from that. So the only difference is that, instead of a notebook that might have taken me 6 months to accumulate little poems in, now I have, this massive corpus that took 20 seconds and maybe is way more overwhelming and maybe is less useful, less personal, but is interesting and sort of allows me one leg ahead maybe in terms of time.
There may be one more from the crowd, but I want to make sure I think it's a really important question. Your tour is almost done.
Yes.
I said, oh, you're going home in 2 weeks, and you all gasped. You're like, no, it's 1 week. So you're all ready to get off the road. What's next for YACHT? What's next for Claire?
Oh boy, wow. Well, we're still going to play shows. I mean, we've been on a 3-month tour, so we're all exhausted, but we're playing lots of shows, one-off shows throughout the rest of the year. I'm hoping to write another book at some point once we have enough downtime. Can you give away the title
or what it's about?
What do you think? I'm just going to tell you now?
No.
I want to write a book about not AI, but about intelligence. This whole process has kind of opened up my thinking about what it means to be intelligent, what it means to have consciousness, and I've become really interested in, completely unrelated in a way, like in the natural world, and I was hoping a little bit that by like studying AI, we as people or as tech workers would develop a greater sort of appreciation and affinity for naturally intelligent systems all around us. I don't know that that's happening. I hope that that's happening, and I've become really fascinated by like fungal networks and animals and plants. And so I want to write a book about AI that's like a nature book. That's next 2 years.
All right, well, we're at time. Oh, okay, very quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if that was like a one-off experiment to you do it again, like if the tools improve or maybe you get the writer's syndrome or something.
Well, I think there's kind of two answers to that. One is that by the time we sit down to make another record, I mean, who knows where these technologies will be. Even in the course of making this album, the tools we use changed, to become unrecognizable from where we began. So we probably can't make a record in the exact same way. I mean, the models are being refined. So maybe we will want to, sample what is available then in the future and see what we can make out of that. The other answer to that question is, I think it was really interesting for us formally to do this project that was quite strict and had all these rules and was like really kind of almost like like a scientific experiment through art. But I think in the future, we will probably use some of these tools and allow ourselves a little bit more fluidity and a little bit more freedom to do things like make harmonies or add our own words. So maybe split the difference between the two in some way.
We are at time. I want to thank, of course, Claire Evans. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.